Those narcissists, their identities derive solely from their material egos, from a sense of power, from validation, and their fear, their greatest fear, is that their shame will get activated. And they are afraid of the things that pluck their insecurities. And money makes one hell of a psychological fortress. So, and one of the series we do is around the science of narcissism. And specifically the science we're going to talk about today relates to the research on narcissism and social status. So welcome back to another of these science videos that allow us to use the data to support what we know about narcissism. To me, understanding the science about narcissism is so important because a lot of this might be based on cases or speculative stuff, but there's a lot of people doing some really great work out there, and I'd love to bring that to you. So today we will talk about something that I think you probably already know about, that people with narcissistic personalities are on a constant pursuit of social status. And the researchers who did this study have actually developed a model to more systematically address that issue. The researchers recently published a paper. The researchers are people named Grapses, Brummelman, Back, and Dennison. And the lead researcher is at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands. They view social status pursuit as simply what narcissistic people do. They argue that it helps narcissists regulate themselves to maintain social status. As we know, there are a lot of strong emotions around narcissism. For example, rage, acting out, passive-aggressive rage. So they need something to regulate all of those strong emotions, especially when they feel shamed or vulnerable, or they'll burst. And pursuit of admiration and validation and social status, they're all ways of regulating those emotions, especially those vulnerable ones as they come up. What these authors are arguing, and I'm going to be simplifying their rather elegant and complex model, is that narcissistic people are always on the hunt for social status, in part because that is what people do. We human beings are a hierarchical species, and we like to know where we stand on a hierarchy. Higher status for any person means more resources and more safety for the people we're close to. Narcissistic people, though, are believed to seek out social status as a way to regulate self-esteem and emotion. If they have more status, then they feel good. It goes beyond just wanting stuff. It's about needing something to help them regulate. Now, the researchers on this paper argue that narcissism consistently is about the pursuit of social status. However, they also note that it isn't as simple as narcissistic people self-promoting as a way to increase their social status. They say that there are two pathways to narcissistic people achieving social status according to the model they came up with. One is to self-promote. We know what that's about. That's when they're preening and bragging and arrogant and posturing and showing up. I'm so great. The other way, the other pathway is through rivalry, basically getting status by putting other people down. Both of these models result in greater social status, and because narcissistic people are always monitoring the situation around them for threats, they want to make sure someone else doesn't have more status than them. They are either going to self-promote or put other people down, depending on how they assess a given situation and what technique will work better in any given place. In their model, and they actually call it the SPIN model, which stands for Status, Pursuit, and Narcissism, they are attempting to create a model that allows us to sort of consistently understand the behavior of narcissistic people in social settings. And while their model is still being developed and tested, I actually found reading it was elegantly simple. A narcissist assesses the situation around them. They determine what they need to do to ensure that they get admiration and, more importantly, social status. And then they figure out that they're either going to get it through self-promotion or by putting other people down, whichever one works better. They found that narcissistic folks are more likely to use the antagonistic rivalry model, putting other people down, to get status when they perceive that they are treated badly or they're not getting the treatment to which they feel entitled. The authors really astutely point out, and this is actually something that many of you have experienced, that narcissistic people value status more than they value closeness, or what we call affiliation. And this is why, even after years of a friendship or a relationship, that they are willing to throw you under the bus if they perceive that you are gaining status, or if throwing you under the bus will get them more status. All of us are disposable in a narcissistic world. The science of narcissism is so important because it gives data-driven substance to what you think is something that might just be in your head. I personally believe that science is the ultimate anti-gaslight. When these observations are upheld by past and current research, and more than just anecdote, and looked at in larger samples of people, this isn't just in your head. It's a data-supported phenomenon. So thanks to Gropsis and colleagues for developing this model of status pursuit. Basically, they're saying that as long as the narcissist feels as though they are at the top of the hierarchy, then everything is fine. Otherwise, watch out, especially if you piss them off. For narcissists, admiration and validation are the air that they breathe. Without it, they cannot function. They're lost, and they honestly would feel like they were suffocating. In many ways, social media, when it came along, became the mothership of all narcissists. Because now, for the first time, they could just sit home from the comfort of their home, post edited photographs and bizarre things that they want to say, and just sit back and wait for followers and likes. It changed the admiration-seeking game and the validation-seeking game to a whole new level. It takes us back to our original premise. Narcissists are deeply insecure. And because of that, in some ways, it's almost like they don't have a fully formed sense of self. So they count on the world to provide that. It's almost like they're like a sculpture that's not fully made, so they need other people to keep putting the clay on it so it turns into something. So they really do look to the world for that. And in that way, that's part of why narcissists are often so frustrated and so rageful. Because without it, they almost feel edgy, like a junkie waiting for a fix. They need people to tell them, you're great, you're attractive, you're smart, I love you, can't get enough of you, and on and on and on. In the absence of validation, in the absence of admiration, they can often feel quite empty. And emptiness is never a good state for a person to be in. In fact, that's often when people start getting into trouble. That emptiness can often be filled with things like drugs and alcohol, food, spending, sex, lots of things that aren't good for you. And it's often why narcissists often seem to have really unregulated appetites. Feeling empty? Go out and buy a $10,000 bag. Feeling like no one is validating you? Go out and do cocaine. So the two things often tend to go together and can really be a setup for narcissists to get themselves into even more trouble, including addiction. So when we look at this sort of core conflict of the validation and admiration seeking, let's think about what it does to anyone who's with them. So let's just start with sort of an intimate relationship. When we're in an intimate relationship with someone, certainly in the early months and maybe even the early year or two, we do admire and validate them a lot. My God, you're so attractive. I'm so lucky. They'll often say slightly more intense things that should be red flags for you, like, this is the greatest love story ever and no one is ever going to love you like I do. So it's all very big. It's all very admiration-seeking. And both of you are telling the other one how wonderful the other one is. You can only keep that up for so long. At some point, things like the dishwasher needing to be emptied and the laundry needing to be done and bills needing to be paid are going to supplant the need to say, you're so great all the time. And you're going to start thinking like, well, aren't we in a rhythm? Like, I think we've established we're great, we're in a committed relationship, but it's never enough for them. And if you don't compliment them the way they want, so think of it this way. I remember someone once saying how she was sharing how she was having a particularly rough week. They had kids and busy life and didn't quite have enough money. And her partner had had some sort of achievement at work. And she did not congratulate him the right way. She's like, oh, that's great. And then she's like, could you hand me that stuff? I need to finish making the salad. He's like, and he threw the stuff on the ground. What? Do you know how important this is? I can't believe you didn't tell me how great I am. Like, this is such a big deal. You're so ungrateful. And then he kind of went off on his, sort of rant of rage. But basically, she validated him a little, but not enough. Admiration and validation seeking is also why narcissists tend to be prone to having extramarital affairs or to cheating or being unfaithful. your validation at some point is not going to be enough. That takes us to a topic called narcissistic supply. For narcissists, other people are almost like cargo ships, bringing validation into the harbor. And if you think your validation is going to be enough, absolutely not. In fact, the validation they get from one person over time, it tends to get stale. So they keep having to get it from other sources. Some people will get it from co-workers and friends and family. They constantly need people telling you, you're so great, you're so great, you're so great. But in an intimate partnership over time, they may find that their partner's supply, as it were, it's getting a little dull. So they go and find someone new. And obviously in the first few months of an affair, they're buying them gifts, they're doing this, they're doing that. Then that new person, their new lover, is saying, you're so great, you're so wonderful. Oh my gosh, your wife, your husband are so lucky to have you. Again, they're seeking out validation and admiration. Not necessarily that they want to leave the marriage. They just need some fresh narcissistic supply. And in that way, it is why it is so exhausting to be with narcissists. I often say that it's because of admiration and validation seeking that it's so easy to deal with a narcissist. Because if you can just sort of get your head around it, kind of psych yourself up and saying, okay, I'm going to admire him for about 5 minutes to get what I need and get out of there. I know that sounds manipulative, but it may be the only way to deal with them, especially, for example, in a workplace setting. A narcissistic coworker are the ones that will stop the staff meeting like, hey, everyone want to hear about what I did right, and are very much willing to extol their virtues and talk about how great they are to everyone who will stand still long enough. And so what can happen is if you have a narcissistic boss, it can often be really easy to keep them right where you need them, compliment them. Oh my gosh, I love your tie. You inspire me so much. You might even want to write them down ahead of time. Like pull them out of your desk drawer. Okay, today I'm going to try the you inspire me, love your tie, and I'm always so happy to work with you. And then mix them up and try another 3 validations the next day. It's a way to kind of get them out of your way. They need it so much. It's like a crying baby. Once you feed them some admiration and validation, you will have appeased them long enough to move them out of your way so you can go do what you need to do. But if this is a close relationship, that's very different. You don't want to think that your marriage or your long-term partnership is going to be really about you saying inane, empty words to a person just to shut them up. But sadly, that might be the only way, if you're stuck in a relationship with a narcissist, to keep that ship afloat. If you had a narcissistic parent, you may have found yourself remembering that, gosh, as a kid, I often did have to tell mom how attractive she was, or how great her cooking was, or tell dad how great he was. Like, you might even remember childhood dinners where a lot of the time was really praising dad and sort of giving great gratitude to dad for everything he does, but it was very one-sided. It wasn't like everyone was sort of sharing their positive regard for everyone else. That dynamic can persist into adulthood, and it can get really exhausting to be dragging all that narcissistic supply to the front door every time you go to visit your parents. This can happen with friends, this can happen with siblings, but when you feel that all they need is admiration and validation, it can be really, really tiresome. Remember, you can learn a lot of these red flags by watching a person on social media. But people who really appear to be out there, like put more and more edited images, more and more outrageous images, maybe even more and more risque or ridiculous, or sort of I don't know, sort of confrontation-inducing images or words just to get people to engage with them or tell them, you look so pretty, you look so nice. And it can get a little bit much after a while. You're thinking like, how many times does my 35-year-old friend need to post a picture of herself in a bikini or on vacation? I know a lot of people say, no, they're just influencers. I don't know that they're influencers. I do think that they probably are just simply chronic validation seekers, and they're trying to turn it into a job title. So it's very much an exhausting element of the dynamics of narcissism to be with someone who's chronically admiration and validation seeking. The best analogy I could really end up on is if you've ever been scuba diving or watched someone in a movie or something like that scuba diving, you see they have a tank on their back and an air hose that goes to their mouth. They're under the water. It's their only source of air. For a narcissist, if there isn't admiration and validation, it's like someone turns off that, or kinks that hose, or turns off that air supply so they can't have any more. If you were a scuba diver and your air supply got cut off, you would panic. And that's exactly how a narcissist feels when their validation stops. And you'll see it when they're in the middle of a crowd. and all the attention isn't on them, it can be a little bit uncomfortable. They may be willing to give up the stage for a little while, but you can start seeing that discomfort sneak in. And if you're in a relationship with a narcissist and it happens to be your big night, don't be surprised if your narcissist halfway through the evening says, you know what, I have a headache. I'm not feeling really well. I might need to go home. I'll catch up with you there. And I'm sure many of you can reflect on times when it was your night and the narcissist in your life, whether it was your partner, a parent, a friend, or a sister, kind of said, I don't think I want to stay any longer, not feeling well. You have a good time. It was simply their inability to tolerate watching you get admiration and validation, which is in fact the air that they breathe. The primary dynamics that drive a narcissistic person in a relationship are power, control, and domination. And the narcissistic person uses the relationship as a source of validation. If those needs are not being met or cannot be achieved, that is a contributor to the volatility of these relationships. So, if you are in a relationship with a narcissistic person and do get more power or control or exert your autonomy, the narcissistic person is going to react badly. So here's some examples of this. One could be that you're the adult child of a narcissistic parent and you no longer need them for money or housing, or you make your own way in the world and they were using money to control you. You are in a narcissistic relationship and you get a promotion or a new job that may put you in a more powerful or well-paid position. Or you leave an abusive, tyrannical, narcissistic boss to take another job or start your own venture where they cannot control you in the day-to-day anymore. The responses to this can vary. In some cases, you will see the narcissistic person try to keep you small, tell you that you're probably going to fail, or that you're kidding yourself if you think you will be able to pull this new thing off, or that this success of yours is temporary or fleeting, or that you better be careful what you wish for because it may all be a big disappointment and won't you feel foolish when it all falls apart. In some cases, you will see that vulnerable victimization we so often see in narcissism. Oh, woe is me, will say the narcissist. Everything goes your way. I guess you won't need me anymore. I guess my life has just been so unlucky. Things come really easily to you. I always have to work hard for everything I get. That kind of thing. In other cases, you may experience abandonment. They may want to leave, say they want to leave the relationship and cut you off, or give you the silent treatment, or even imply that maybe this relationship won't work because you will be so busy in your new job. Or they may go full on revenge on you. This may be, for example, a smear campaign by that tyrannical boss who tries to badmouth you, and badmouth your new endeavor, or talking with other people about you and saying bad things, or holding back on a piece of information that you may need. They will actively try to sabotage you. Remember what healing is about in these relationships. Finally crawling out of the subjugated space that you had to remain in to keep this relationship going. Silencing yourself, making yourself smaller, pretty much clipping your own wings, not individuating or developing your own autonomy of any kind. But healing also means, as you individuate, that you will incur the wrath, displeasure, or frank abandonment by the narcissist. Your growth is not something that the narcissistic person can tolerate, especially because it means they're going to lose their power and their control. So when you slowly slip out of their control, you become an object of contempt. You stop being supply. You're a headache. And they want to put you back in your subjugated place. They want you in the service of their ego, not growing as an individual yourself. Narcissistic people do not like relationships that they cannot control, which is often why they are so focused on getting into leadership positions. By being in charge, they can control. And that could be everything from being the shift manager at a fast food restaurant to the CEO of a corporation. It's all about control. Might be small scale, might be big scale, but it's control. When a narcissistic person senses that they are losing control of you, you can expect this entire litany of reactions, and they may shapeshift and shift strategies too. Some vindictiveness, then victimhood, then abandonment. It can be a painful realization and a difficult part of healing that your growth, your advancement, your aspiration, you simply becoming you, was never going to be allowed in this relationship. You may have suspected it, but when it really happens, you see it. Many people who are very trauma bonded in these relationships know that the implicit message is that if you grow, they will leave. And the fears that go along with it means that many people in narcissistic relationships have shrunk themselves for years to make it work. Because no, they will be pissed off, and then they will continue to berate you or abandon you if you dare ever get out of their controlling grip. There's no room for two people's realities in a narcissistic relationship. Always keep that in mind. These relationships work as long as they can dominate and control you. And once you challenge that dynamic, it cannot work. So the short answer to that is they will blow up or they will leave. But that idea of either facing the rage or facing the abandonment is so overwhelming for so many people in a narcissistic relationship that even though it's not intentional, that you may find yourself holding yourself back and not expanding yourself to all the full potential that you have because of that fear and because the narcissistic person will not lose control of you, and you might feel too scared of what will happen if you did. My only hope for you someday is that you do. But in the macro, even the few research studies I found suggest that people who have narcissistic personalities do tend to make more money. It's not just luck. It's not life being unfair. There's just more to it than that. For people with narcissistic personalities, power, dominance, and ego are what get them up in the morning and keep them going all day. It's a singular motivation for them. And in most of the world, I hate to say it, most of the world, the quickest path forward to money is power and ego, and vice versa. The quickest power to power and ego is money. Now, healthy people don't derive their sole identity from money. Most of us need more of it, but we have limits on what we're willing to do for it. We may, most of us, not be willing to trade our souls, not betray people in a big way, to break rules or laws in a way to get it. We may even do jobs we don't love, or not want to work as hard as we do, but we do it to pay the bills. But a healthy person derives their identity from meaning, purpose, relationships, activities that we feel good about, doing things that represent what we stand for. And in that way, we have people out there who may not make lots of money, but they do tremendously meaningful work. They have loving friends and family and get their identity from who they are rather than what they are. But alas, those narcissists, their identities derive solely from their material egos, from a sense of power, from validation, and their fear, their greatest fear, is that their shame will get activated. And they are afraid of the things that pluck their insecurities. And money makes one hell of a psychological fortress. And so they create these seemingly enviable lifestyles and protect themselves and whiz around in fast cars and live in tricked out homes and may have fancy jobs, or at least pretend like they have fancy jobs. And they might have fancy shoes or fancy watches or fancy handbags. Wealthy narcissists will use that money to lord over other people. They use it to keep their partners around, to manipulate family members, and to control their employees. It really is a handy device for narcissists who derive a lot of identity from controlling other people and inducing envy in them. But to have it, they gotta be able to make it. And here is where the narcissistic personality's entitlement, grandiosity, on-again, off-again relationship with ethics, their tendency to play it fast and loose with the truth, their lack of empathy, and little regard for how their choices affect other people. That's how they make it. People higher in narcissism are more competitive, more ambitious, more concerned with winning, more extroverted, more desirous of leadership. So when you put all of that together and shake it all up, and given that money is the ultimate narcissistic supply, you have in a narcissist a person who is willing to do whatever it takes to make money. They will burn bridges, hurt colleagues, betray friends and family, lie, cheat, ignore rules, rationalize shady choices, and power to the front of the line. In the United States, at least, we tend to forgive people who broke the rules to get to the top, as long as they get to the top. Now, sadly, we are a culture that reveres very wealthy people. Now, listen, I know that not all people with money are bad people. Some people have the good luck of inheriting it, and they're aware of their blessings and may even do some really good things with it. Some people legit earn their money, and they're good people. Some people win it. But unfortunately, the way money is set up in our culture, a lot of people who have a lot of it don't play by the rules. The willingness within the narcissistic personality to skirt the rules and feel entitled to break those rules can often set them up to do quite well in business or in other fields. For many of us, doing the right thing means that we do leave money on the table. We play by the rules, we pay our taxes, we help other people out. That's not exactly a fast track to getting rich or perhaps even saving a nest egg. And it's not just money. In some fields, people can really succeed and become the boss even if they don't make a lot of money. Some fields just don't pay a lot. But they may get promotions, they might get a bigger title, and those promotions and title can come with power. I'm always struck by how many people are more than qualified to be the leader, but are pretty content with what they're doing, don't feel that they need the adulation or the power or frankly the headaches. I've seen it happen more times than I can count. Sort of people getting ahead on the basis of Machiavellianism, that sort of political savvy, but not necessarily on the basis of skill or ability. Again, that narcissistic drive to win and get narcissistic supply can lead to a completely blind pursuit to succeed and typically make money. Listen, ambition is not a bad thing. I think it's wonderful to have goals, to pursue them passionately, and to see them through. That's all good. What's not good is consistently harming other people in their pursuit and feeling entitled to do what you need to get ahead, and hurt anyone in the process. And yet, the pillars of the narcissistic personality are a setup to do just this. And from there, we get the unempathic bosses, the billionaires, and robber barons that have made this world a big, fat mess. Now, sadly, many people really get hurt by this. So let's just say even we're talking about trying to find a mentor. What do we look for in a mentor, right? We look for a person who has succeeded in their field. It isn't often that a person chooses their mentor on the basis of saying, hey, this person has great work-life balance and they've slowed their career down and they make a lot of compromises and they play really nice. I've actually chosen my mentors on this basis, like really chosen some sweet people. Smartest thing I've ever done. And in this way, though, what gets problematic is a lot of people do choose narcissists to be their mentors. They can really be harmful and destructive mentors because you wanted someone at the top of your game to be your mentor. It sucks because money is such a source of power in this world, and it is a tool that allows many people with narcissistic personalities to get away with just about anything. That impunity can continue to enable these patterns in the very people that many other people are trying to emulate, which again is the mess we're in our world right now. Research has consistently shown that people who are narcissistic, I should say, research has shown that narcissism is overrepresented in CEOs, celebrities, athletes, and people who pursue leadership are actually more likely to have narcissistic traits than those who don't. Billionaires are more likely to have these qualities, as are politicians. And we see narcissism in doctors, lawyers, even religious leaders, people who are supposed to be shepherding their flock, priests, pastors, rabbis, you name it. Many people think, I can't be right. Really, narcissism helps people succeed? Yeah, it does. I remember years ago, an undergraduate in one of my classes approached me after class, after I had actually taught part of a unit on narcissism. At the time, he was taking night classes as he pursued a career by day. And he was a hardworking guy. And he said, "Doc, after hearing you talk about narcissism today, it sure seems like it would help my career. Can I come to your office hours or set up a meeting with you so you can teach me?" I was like, I smiled for a moment, thinking it could be an interesting side hustle for me. How to teach people to channel their inner narcissist and become rich. But nah, he seemed sort of like a sweet kid, and I don't know. I never had him in a class again, so who knows if he's ever going to achieve the success he wanted. I was reminded, though, that in my career at least, I would rather protect people from patterns such as narcissism or help them heal, rather than to practice the dark art of channeling their narcissism. So for all of you out there who are saying, it seems like the narcissists are all making a lot of money, you're probably right. The qualities associated with narcissism, sadly, can often be associated with egocentrism, the willingness to put one's needs first, and making sure that they get not only the biggest piece of the pie, but they take that biggest piece of the pie out of the middle. And that's why. And then you got to ask yourself, what are the trade-offs you'd be willing to make for that? You might think you can, but then that authentic part of you kicks in and says, nah, I can't do this. And if it means I make a little bit less, at least maybe, I hope, I'll sleep a little bit better at night. But unfortunately for the narcissists who do get financially successful, that financial success becomes one more tool with which they can bully and control other people. And the other risky bit is because many times people choose partners on the basis of their financial or career success. It's in this way that more than a few people have gotten roped into marriages or long-term relationships with narcissists who've made a lot of money. And then it can yield, you start to realize at the time it might seem nice to have all that money and advantage and gifts and lovely places to live. But over time you'd be like, listen, I'd rather live in a box than be living with this person anymore. And if you grew up with a financially successful narcissist, you could easily see how toxic that money would become in the family system. It would become a way of showing love. It would be withheld as a way to punish. And the narcissist at the core of it, the one with all the money, really is able to run that family from a bully pulpit, using the money as, in essence, a bunch of strings to pull the puppets that they call the people in their family. Now, if you have a narcissistic person in your life, particularly a vulnerable narcissist, and we're going to keep using that term because a lot of people call them covert narcissists. It's not a synonymous term, but vulnerable narcissists. You have definitely observed this phenomenon. But you may have also observed this tendency of failure to launch in the other narcissistic types. So let's talk about failure to launch. It can be deeply frustrating to witness this pattern, especially if this is your adult child, your partner, or someone who, because of their failure to launch, it ends up putting a pretty major financial or even practical burden on you. Now, it's not just narcissists that have the failure to launch, but let's talk about it particularly as it relates to narcissism. The narcissistic person's grandiosity is a really interesting barrier to them actually getting anything done. Narcissistic folks love to talk a big game. They like to talk about the screenplays they're writing that are going to get made, and they know a guy who knows a guy who has a connection for this new business that they're going to open, or they're going to start a new makeup line or handbag line or cupcake store or craft business or pie shop or consulting practice. So many things, and they talk about it. Heck, they even get the logo made before there's actually anything done. These are all lovely endeavors, but to make these things get off the ground require tons of hustle, hard work, timing, more hustle, persistence, grit, and hard work. The problem is that so many narcissistic people feel entitled to success, and they often resent the world when it doesn't deliver on the successes that they believe that they deserve. The idea that they have to work hard, roll up, take lots of shots at target, sometimes endure disappointment. Again, that flies in the face of the grandiosity. I'm so great. Why do I have to try so hard? And then they fall into victimization. Well, other people don't have to try so hard. Other people are taking advantage of me. These narcissistic folks literally want businesses handed to them and want them to be profitable on day one. Many narcissistic folks will cite ADHD as the reason that they cannot get things done, despite, in most cases, that they were never formally assessed for it. I gotta tell you, when what's called ADHD consistently sits alongside patterns like lack of empathy, entitlement, grandiosity, validation seeking, I tend to be a little dubious about using it as a sort of an explanation or a way to get out of things. It becomes an excuse for everything for why they shouldn't have to get out of bed in a timely manner in the morning, or meet deadlines, or even show up to a job on time, or listen to what anyone else has to say. And then they'll say things like, oh, I just have so many amazing ideas and so many creative thoughts. I'm just distracted by all of it. I can't focus on just one. There is good research showing the impact, for example, from a treatment perspective, the utility and the impact of techniques like mindfulness on ADHD. It works well. But alas, if you were to make the suggestion of mindfulness training to a narcissist, then the therapist or anyone else that's trying to help the narcissist is often faced with contempt for suggesting something like mindfulness. You simply can't win. Now, another issue that comes up quite regularly with the narcissistic person's failure to launch is the idea that, oh, nobody is showing me how to become successful. I'm not sure exactly who's supposed to show you that, but they will often blame parents, teachers, lack of mentors, and all of that without ever actually reaching out to anyone to even try to find guidance. They actually, I guess they expect people are going to reach out to them and offer them pearls of wisdom. There is very little taking of responsibility for themselves, but lots of energy is put into blaming the world for why they couldn't reach grand heights of success. If they put as much time into working as they do into blaming, I don't see how they couldn't be successful. Now, narcissistic folks are often quite perfectionistic. It's a manifestation of the grandiose defense. By holding a perfect standard, in a way they think, well, then I'm perfect. The problem with perfectionism, and not just narcissistic perfectionism, but anyone who struggles with perfectionism, is that it stops things from getting done. And many narcissistic folks who have this perfectionistic bent won't launch because they tend to get so lost in small details and are rigidly stuck to those details, so nothing real gets done. And of course, as we all know, narcissistic people care so much about how they look to the world, about success, about being the very best, about being seen as the very best. And in many ways, let me tell you, that does them no favors. They aren't interested in the climb. They are only interested in the summit. And they have lots of contempt for the climb. They want to talk about their IPO, the big house they're going to buy, the vacations they're going to take, the things that they're going to do when they have their success, the power that they're going to have. They like to talk about that summit, that outcome, but there's almost never a well-articulated sense of how to do the gut work to get there. The daily, often unrecognized work of dues paying or just trying things out to see what works, That kind of day-to-day slog, that is not interesting to a narcissistic person. Their focus is on the grandiose conclusion, and it doesn't include all of the work that has to happen in between. If you talk with a narcissistic person, well, perhaps in a casual conversation, you will see that they're really good about talking about the big goal at the end of the road. They haven't opened the business yet, but they're already talking about franchising it. They don't have anything resembling a business plan, and they're already looking at places they're going to rent and the display cases that they're going to use. They haven't applied to school yet, but they're already talking about graduating and then getting their first job and how much money they're going to make. Listen, initially, it can be sort of fun to listen to these big dreams, but over time, it becomes a bit annoying, as though you are watching a children's show about something sort of fantastical that isn't going to happen. And if you're having to bankroll this, it can get really, really annoying. But where this can be most difficult is if this unlaunched narcissistic person is at all financially dependent on you. A narcissistic adult child, a narcissistic partner, maybe even someone you work with. They may at times be hostile, irritable. They may blame you for their lack of success. They may be full of self-loathing for having nothing to do all day. They may be rageful, entitled, saying things like, ugh, it's BS that someone as smart as me has to jump through all of these hoops. And they still with that grandiosity, and then talking about everything from their ADHD to the lack of support to nobody believes in them despite you supporting them day after day. Then they'll talk about how the world is unfair, that life is unjust. All of these become the reasons for their not succeeding. I have witnessed many people put tens of thousands of dollars and hours into trying to help a narcissistic person launch. After all that, only to have them still living in a financially dependent state and blaming you for it. Narcissistic people actually feel tremendous shame over their failure to launch. It's at odds with the grandiose defenses, and they know that other people may not view them as successes because they haven't launched. The social comparison that narcissistic people engage in, for example, looking at their social media, perhaps seeing someone else that they know who is succeeding far more than they are, it can definitely evoke that shame even more. And that shame will turn into rage that they lash out with at the people who most support them, like their family members and their partners. It can feel absolutely terrible to help and sacrifice and support and then have someone turn around and blame you for them not launching. And it's here that we tend to see a lot of enabling. Some parents feel guilty that their narcissistic child isn't launching. In fact, many parents may even be reluctant to see their child through a lens of narcissism. And parents, for example, in this situation, may keep feeding the beast in hopes that their support will leave their child feeling supported so they will finally launch. But alas, the victimhood that we so often see that becomes a part of the narcissistic person's identity, you supporting them, even though they claim they are not supported, actually doesn't work. Because then it kind of takes away an excuse for not succeeding, right? So you can't win. It's easier for them to remain victimized and passive-aggressive. It's as though that's almost more congruent with their identity. The grandiose and entitled expectations of sort of quick success is what trips up many a narcissistic person, and it can contribute to the failure to launch. This mixes up with their tendency to engage in lots of social comparison, because narcissistic people will often compare themselves to exceptional, very exceptional and privileged cases. the trust fund kid, the kid whose parent is bringing them to take over their own very successful company, or somebody who has connections at a certain university and can get them in, or the kid whose parent is already a successful movie star wanting to go into the entertainment biz. Because those special people, people of that kind of privilege, are sort of viewed as special. Those special people are in line with how the narcissistic person views themselves. I mean, unlike the rest of us unwashed schlubs who don't come from fancy family legacies, and we just have to get up and do the work and hope that it keeps the rent paid and the lights on. A narcissistic person hates the idea of being that ordinary. To be ordinary for a narcissistic person is actually like hell. If you are experiencing this kind of frustration in a narcissistic relationship, you are not alone. Failure to launch is a universal feature of the narcissistic relationship. So what do you do? And I mean, think about it. There's so many ways that this can play out. There's really not much you can do. And that's a sort of a kind of defeatist, but there's really not. The more you keep giving into it, the more you are enabling it. And you don't need to be intentionally cruel, but you're not going to fix it by giving them more and more resources. After a while, a narcissist can become a real money pit. Ultimately, we are all responsible for how each of our own stories turn out in many ways. And some of us may have had many, many more barriers in our way than others. People figure it out. But that rationale only works with people who are not chronically grandiose. Another situation to sort of keep in mind in these relationships is, for example, if let's say you are in a relationship with somebody who's on this constant failure to launch, trying to launch this, trying to launch that, bigger idea, they get frustrated, they feel entitled, they don't really do the work, they feel almost like contemptuous that they have to, and you're actually trying to have a family or raise kids with a person like this. It can be incredibly painful to watch the kinds of financial sacrifices you and your kids often have to make for the folly of a narcissistic person's dream. And you may wonder, are they not seeing the impact this is having on the kids? No, they're not, because they can't see what's happening around them. Because keep in mind, as always, the narcissistic person isn't going to change on your watch. It can be frustrating as hell to watch this. And it can also be draining you financially if they aren't contributing to a household, and especially if you are the primary provider of money and household work. If you are spending money on them that you're going to need, for example, in older age, if you keep giving advice that is never taken and wasting your time, this is not only financially draining you, it's really psychologically draining you. We are all responsible for our own launch, for our own flight, right? A gust of wind certainly helps, but the rest of it is up to us. And I guess that narcissistic grandiosity and entitlement are like the weights, like hanging off the side of a balloon, that keep the narcissistic folks from taking off in many cases. And as always, thanks for tuning in. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And as always, please subscribe and tell other people about it. And hit that bell for notifications, because then you'll get daily notifications every time we put out a new video.